The dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the attic window as I carefully lifted another box from the pile. 3 months after my grandmother's funeral, I was finally tackling the overwhelming task of sorting through her belongings. The old Victorian house in Boston's Beacon Hill had been in our family for generations, and every room seemed to hold a century's worth of memories. My sister Victoria had been conveniently too busy to help with this monumental task. As the golden child who'd graduated from Harvard Business School and landed a coveted position at Goldman Sachs, she claimed her time was too valuable for such mundane activities. "Just donate everything, Maya," she'd said dismissively over our last family dinner. "It's not like grandmother had anything valuable up there." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra. Special for you, how wrong she would turn out to be. I pulled another cardboard box toward me, this one heavier than the others and marked in grandmother's careful script. Elizabeth, Personal Papers, 1952-1985. My grandmother's name was Margaret, not Elizabeth, but I'd learned over the years that she sometimes used different names for different purposes. It had always seemed like harmless eccentricity. Inside the box, beneath layers of yellowed tissue paper, I found something that made my heart skip. A leather portfolio, thick and professional, embossed with gold lettering that read, "Sterling Enterprises, Confidential." My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside were incorporation documents, financial statements, and what appeared to be a company charter dated 1952. My grandmother's signature was on every document, but not as Margaret Chen. She'd signed them as Elizabeth Sterling. As I read through the papers, my world shifted on its axis. Sterling Enterprises wasn't just some small business my grandmother had run decades ago. According to these documents, it was a holding company that owned stakes in dozens of other businesses. Real estate holdings across New England, technology patents from the early computer age, investment portfolios that, if these numbers were accurate, were worth millions, possibly tens of millions. I sat back on my heels trying to process what I was seeing. My grandmother, who'd lived modestly in this old house, who'd clipped coupons and saved aluminum foil, who'd worn the same wool coat for 20 years, had been secretly wealthy. Not just comfortable. Wealthy. But why the secrecy? I dug deeper into the box, finding more documents that began to paint a picture. Letters from lawyers, correspondence with business partners, and then a handwritten note that made everything click into place. For my granddaughter Maya, you always listened when others talked. You asked questions when others made assumptions. You saw people for who they truly were, not who they appeared to be. The family business needs someone like you. Trust no one until you understand the full picture. Grandmother Margaret, Elizabeth Sterling. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My hands were shaking now. She'd meant for me to find this. She'd left it for me specifically. But why not Victoria? Why not tell our parents? Why all the secrecy? I found part of the answer in another folder marked Family History Confidential. Inside were newspaper clippings from the 1940s and 1950s, articles about business scandals and family feuds. The Sterling name appeared frequently, always in connection with corporate disputes and inheritance battles. One headline made me gasp. Sterling heiress disappears after hostile takeover attempt by brother. The article was dated 1951, and it was about my grandmother. According to the yellowed newsprint, Elizabeth Sterling had been the sole heir to the Sterling family fortune when her older brother challenged the will in court. He'd claimed she was mentally unfit to run the business empire their father had built. The legal battle had been vicious and public, with accusations flying on both sides. Then suddenly, Elizabeth Sterling had simply vanished from public life. The next article I found was her obituary, dated 1952. Elizabeth Sterling, 23, presumed dead after disappearing from family estate. But Elizabeth Sterling hadn't died. She'd become Margaret Chen, married my grandfather, and hidden her true identity for over 60 years. Now I understood the secrecy. She'd faked her own death to escape her family's greed and had been secretly managing her business empire ever since. The modest lifestyle had been camouflage, a way to ensure no one would suspect the truth. I spent the next several hours reading through document after document. Corporate reports showed that Sterling Enterprises had grown exponentially under my grandmother's careful stewardship. She'd diversified the holdings, invested in emerging technologies, and built something that put most Fortune 500 companies to shame. And according to the will I found in the bottom of the portfolio, she'd left it all to me. Not to both Victoria and me. Not to our parents. Just to me. The weight of this discovery was overwhelming. I was potentially one of the wealthiest people in New England, and I'd been living paycheck to paycheck as a freelance graphic designer. But more than that, I was the inheritor of a legacy my grandmother had protected with her life. As the sun began to set outside the attic window, I carefully repacked the documents and carried the box downstairs to my car. I needed time to process this, to understand what it all meant, and to figure out my next steps. Most importantly, I needed to do it without my family knowing. My grandmother's warning echoed in my mind. Trust no one until you understand the full picture. I drove to my small apartment in Cambridge, my mind racing. The contrast between my cramped studio and the empire I'd apparently inherited was almost surreal. I spread the documents across my kitchen table and began making lists, trying to understand the scope of what I'd discovered. Sterling Enterprises owned a significant stake in 3 major tech companies that had gone public in the last decade. It held the patents on several foundational internet technologies. The real estate portfolio alone included properties in Boston, New York, and San Francisco that had to be worth hundreds of millions. But there was something else in the documents that worried me. Recent correspondence from lawyers and business. Managers all addressed to E. Sterling at a post office box I didn't recognize. They were asking for guidance on major business decisions, reporting quarterly profits, and seeking approval for new investments. Someone had been running Sterling Enterprises since my grandmother's death, someone who knew her secret identity and had been making decisions in her name. The letterhead on the most recent correspondence made my blood run cold. Victoria Chen, MBA, business consultant and family representative. My sister had known. She'd known about Sterling Enterprises, and she'd been positioning herself to take control. I grabbed my phone and called the lawyer whose name appeared most frequently in the recent documents. It took 3 tries and some creative storytelling, but I finally got him on the line. Mr. Patterson, this is Maya Chen, Margaret Chen's granddaughter. I need to speak with you about Sterling Enterprises. The silence on the other end of the line was telling. I'm sorry, Miss Chen, but I'm not familiar with that name in connection with our client. Perhaps you're thinking of Elizabeth Sterling, I interrupted. My grandmother was Elizabeth Sterling. Another pause. Then, I think we need to meet, in person. How soon can you get to my office? An hour later, I sat in the mahogany-paneled office of Patterson, Wells & Associates, clutching my grandmother's portfolio. James Patterson was a distinguished man in his 60s who'd clearly been dealing with the Sterling account for decades. Your grandmother was an extraordinary woman, he said after reviewing the documents I'd brought. She created something remarkable while living in complete anonymity. But I have to ask, how did you find these papers? They were in her attic. She left them for me to find. I pulled out the handwritten note. She wanted me to have the company. Patterson's expression grew troubled. That's problematic. Your sister has been in contact with us for the past 2 months, claiming to be the rightful heir. She's provided documentation suggesting your grandmother intended for her to inherit the business. My heart sank. What kind of documentation? He pulled out a file and showed me what appeared to be a handwritten letter from my grandmother, dated just weeks before her death. It named Victoria as the successor to Sterling Enterprises and granted her full authority to make business decisions. But something about the letter bothered me. I studied it carefully, comparing it to my grandmother's authentic handwriting in the documents I'd found. "This is forged," I said finally. "Look at the way she writes her G's. In all her authentic documents, she makes them with a distinct loop. This letter doesn't have that characteristic." Patterson leaned forward, studying the documents more carefully. "You're right. I should have caught that." He looked up at me with new respect. "Your grandmother trained you well. She always said the devil was in the details." "You knew her personally?" "For 30 years. She was brilliant, paranoid, and absolutely right to be both." He stood and walked to a safe behind his desk. "She left specific instructions for this scenario. She predicted someone would try to forge her wishes." From the safe, he retrieved a sealed envelope with my name written on it in my grandmother's unmistakable handwriting. Inside was another letter, this one clearly authentic. "My dear Maya, if you're reading this, then someone has tried to steal what I've built." I expected this would happen, though I hoped it wouldn't be family. Victoria has always been ambitious, but ambition without wisdom is dangerous. Sterling Enterprises isn't just a business. It's a responsibility. The decisions made by this company affect thousands of employees and millions of customers. It requires someone who can see beyond immediate profit to long-term consequences. You have shown me throughout your life that you possess the judgment and integrity this responsibility demands. Victoria has shown me the opposite. The documents you found in the attic are just the beginning. There are 3 more caches hidden throughout the house. Find them before anyone else does. The locations are behind the false panel in the library fireplace, beneath the loose floorboard in the blue bedroom closet, and inside the grandfather clock in the front hall. But be warned, once you claim your inheritance, you'll become a target. People will try to manipulate you, use you, and destroy you to get what you have. Trust no one until they've proven themselves through actions, not words. Most importantly, remember that with great power comes the obligation to use it wisely. I built this empire not for personal gain, but to create something that would outlast me and benefit others. Don't let anyone turn it into a weapon. Your loving grandmother, Margaret, Elizabeth. I looked up at Patterson, who was watching me carefully. She knew Victoria would try this? She suspected. Your sister has been asking questions about your grandmother's finances for years? Subtle inquiries about investments, property holdings, business connections. Elizabeth thought Victoria was simply being curious, but the pattern concerned her. What happens now? Now, you have a choice. You can claim your inheritance and step into your grandmother's shoes as the head of Sterling Enterprises. Or you can walk away and let Victoria's forgery stand. But I should warn you, if you choose to fight, it won't be easy. Victoria has already begun positioning herself with key business partners and board members. She's convincing, credible, and she has the business credentials to back up her claims. I thought about my sister's dismissive attitude toward our grandmother, the way she'd always treated her as a harmless old woman with outdated ideas. Victoria had never shown any real interest in family history or grandmother's stories about the past. She'd only cared about advancing her own career. But she'd been planning this takeover for months, maybe years. "I need to get back to the house," I said, standing up. "There are more documents to find." Patterson handed me his business card. "Be careful, Maya. If Victoria realizes you've discovered the truth, she'll escalate quickly. She's already scheduled a board meeting for next week to formalize her position as CEO. As I drove back to Beacon Hill, my mind was racing. I had 6 days to find the remaining documents, understand the full scope of my inheritance, and figure out how to stop my sister from stealing what rightfully belonged to me. But first, I needed to understand exactly what Victoria had been up to, and that meant going back to the house when she wouldn't expect me. I parked 2 blocks away and approached the house through the back alley. Victoria's BMW was in the driveway, which meant she was inside, probably searching for exactly what I'd already found. Using the spare key I'd kept from childhood, I slipped in through the kitchen door. I could hear voices from upstairs, Victoria's voice and another I didn't recognize. A man's voice, professional and clipped. "Need to find any other documents before the board meeting," Victoria was saying. "If there's anything that contradicts our narrative, it could destroy everything." "The forgery is perfect," the man replied. "No one will question its authenticity, but we should be thorough. Check the library, the study, anywhere she might have hidden important papers." I crept up the back stairs, staying close to the wall to avoid the creaking boards I remembered from childhood games of hide-and-seek. The voices were coming from the master bedroom. "What about her granddaughter?" the man asked. "The artist? Could she be a problem?" Victoria's laugh was cold and dismissive. "Maya, she's completely clueless about business. She's been struggling to pay her rent for years. Even if she found something, she wouldn't understand its significance. Still, it might be wise to keep an eye on her. These family disputes can get complicated." "Maya won't be an issue," Victoria said firmly. "She's always been the dreamer of the family. She'll probably be relieved that someone else is handling the complicated stuff." I'd heard enough. I carefully made my way back downstairs and out through the kitchen, my mind burning with anger and determination. Victoria thought I was naive and helpless. She was about to learn how wrong she was. But first, I needed those hidden documents. And I needed to find them before Victoria realized they existed. I waited until I saw her BMW pull out of the driveway, then used my key to go back inside. The grandfather clock in the front hall was an obvious place to start. I'd always been fascinated by its intricate mechanism as a child, and I remembered my grandmother showing me how to open the case to wind it. The hidden compartment was cleverly concealed behind the pendulum housing. Inside, I found another leather portfolio, this one containing financial statements and corporate governance documents that made the first discovery look modest. Sterling Enterprises wasn't just wealthy, it was a financial powerhouse that had been flying under the radar for decades. The documents showed recent acquisitions, including a controlling stake in a major pharmaceutical company and significant investments in renewable energy. My grandmother hadn't just been maintaining her inheritance. She'd been growing it exponentially. But most important was a document titled Succession Planning, Confidential. It outlined her concerns about family members who might try to claim the business for their own purposes. Victoria's name appeared several times, along with detailed observations about her character and motivations. Victoria has always seen relationships as transactions, one entry read. She evaluates people based on what they can do for her, not who they are as individuals. This makes her effective in business negotiations, but dangerous as a leader of a company that affects so many lives. Another entry was even more damning. I fear Victoria would use Sterling Enterprises as a stepping stone to greater power, sacrificing the company's values and employees for short-term personal gain. She has never shown genuine concern for others, unless it benefits her somehow. As I read through my grandmother's careful character assessments, I realized she'd been studying both Victoria and me for years, documenting our choices and behaviors like a social scientist. The evidence was overwhelming. She'd chosen me not out of favoritism, but because she genuinely believed I would protect what she'd built. The question was, could I prove I was worthy of that trust? I carefully repacked the documents and prepared to search the other 2 locations. But as I reached for the library fireplace, I heard the front door open. Victoria was back. I grabbed the portfolio and slipped behind the heavy curtains just as her heels clicked across the marble foyer. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure she could hear it. "I know you're in here, Maya," Victoria's voice called out, sickeningly sweet. "Your car is parked down the street. We need to talk." I held my breath, pressing myself against the wall behind the curtains. Through the gap in the fabric, I could see Victoria moving through the rooms systematically, searching for me. "I found some interesting documents upstairs," she continued, her voice getting closer to the library. "Documents about grandmothers, business interests. I think we should discuss how to handle this as a family." She was lying, of course. She hadn't found anything upstairs because I'd already taken the important documents. But she knew I'd been there, and she was trying to draw me out. I remained perfectly still as she entered the library, listening to her move around the room. She spent a long time at the fireplace, clearly looking for the hidden panel my grandmother had mentioned. "You know, Maya," Victoria said, her voice now carrying a sharp edge. "Grandmother always said you were the smart one, but intelligence without experience is just naivety. This business world isn't a place for dreamers." I watched through the curtains as she finally found the hidden panel behind the fireplace. Her face fell when she discovered it was empty. "Damn it," she muttered, then raised her voice again. "Maya, I know you're here somewhere. We can do this the easy way or the hard way, but either way, we're going to settle this." I waited until she moved on to search other rooms, then carefully slipped out from behind the curtains and headed for the back stairs. I needed to get to the blue bedroom and find the third cache of documents before she did. But as I reached the second floor, I realized Victoria wasn't alone. The man's voice I'd heard earlier was coming from the blue bedroom. "Check every inch," he was saying. "These old houses have hiding places everywhere." I was trapped between them, with Victoria searching the first floor and her accomplice in the room I needed to access. I ducked into the bathroom and tried to think. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Maya, this is James Patterson. Meet me at my office immediately. Victoria has accelerated her timeline. The board meeting has been moved to tomorrow morning." Tomorrow morning. That gave me less than 12 hours to find the remaining documents and build my case. I texted back, "Can't leave the house yet. Victoria is here with someone else. They're searching for documents." His response was immediate. "Get out of there now. If they realize you found something, they'll destroy the evidence." But I couldn't leave without the documents from the blue bedroom. My grandmother had hidden them there for a reason, and they might contain the key to stopping Victoria's takeover. I could hear footsteps on the back stairs. Victoria was coming up to join her accomplice. In moments, they'd discover I was in the house. I had to make a choice: escape with what I had, or risk everything to get the complete picture my grandmother had wanted me to see. As the footsteps grew closer, I realized there was only one way this could end. Tomorrow morning, one way or another, the truth about Sterling Enterprises would come out. The question was, would I be strong enough to protect my grandmother's legacy, or would Victoria's ambition destroy everything our family had built? I gripped the portfolio tighter and prepared to find out. The footsteps were getting closer. I had maybe 30 seconds before Victoria reached the second floor. My eyes darted around the bathroom, looking for any possible escape route. The window was too high and faced the front street. I'd be seen immediately. Then I remembered something from childhood: the dumbwaiter. The old house had been built with a service elevator that connected the kitchen to the upper floors. It hadn't been used in decades, but if the mechanism still worked, I slipped out of the bathroom and crept down the hall to the small alcove where the dumbwaiter door was hidden behind a decorative panel. My fingers found the brass handle, turned it quietly, and pulled. The door opened with the faintest whisper. The shaft was dark and narrow, but I could see the ancient pulley system was still intact. I stuffed the portfolio inside my jacket, said a silent prayer, and climbed into the cramped space just as Victoria's voice echoed down the hallway. "Robert, check the blue bedroom again. She has to be here somewhere." I pulled the door closed behind me and began the terrifying descent using the old rope system to lower myself floor by floor. The mechanism groaned softly, but held. When I reached the kitchen level, I could hear Victoria's heels clicking on the marble above as she searched room by room. I emerged from the dumbwaiter covered in dust and cobwebs, grabbed my grandmother's spare car keys from the kitchen drawer, and slipped out through the back door. Victoria's BMW was still in the front driveway, but there was a black sedan parked across the street that hadn't been there before. Professional surveillance. This was bigger than just a family dispute. I made my way through the back gardens to the alley where my grandmother's old Mercedes was parked in the detached garage. She'd barely driven it in her final years, but I'd helped her maintain it during my weekend visits. The engine turned over on the second try, purring with the quiet confidence of German engineering. As I pulled out of the alley, I caught a glimpse of a man standing at the front window of the house, tall, expensive suit, scanning the street, with the systematic attention of someone accustomed to surveillance. Robert, I assumed. He wasn't just a business consultant. He was something much more dangerous. I drove carefully through Beacon Hill's narrow streets, checking my mirrors constantly. No one followed, but that didn't mean I was safe. If Victoria had professional help, they could be tracking me in ways I couldn't detect. My phone rang as I merged onto Storrow Drive. Patterson's name appeared on the screen. "Maya, where are you? I just got a call from Victoria's attorney. They're demanding an emergency injunction to freeze all Sterling Enterprises assets pending resolution of the inheritance dispute." They can do that? With the forged documents, they have grounds to claim the estate is in dispute. If a judge grants the injunction, no business decisions can be made until the matter is resolved in court. That could take months, maybe years. I felt sick. Victoria wasn't just trying to steal my inheritance. She was trying to paralyze the company until she could solidify her position. What do we need to stop her? Proof that her documents are forged, which we have. But more importantly, we need the complete succession documentation your grandmother left. Without it, this becomes a he-said-she-said battle that could destroy the company. I know where the other documents are hidden. I just need to get back to the house without Victoria knowing. Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. If they realize, you've discovered the truth. They already know, I interrupted, telling him about the confrontation at the house. This Robert person isn't just a business consultant. He's conducting surveillance. The silence on Patterson's end was telling. "Robert Chambers," he said finally. "Victoria hired him 2 months ago. He's a private investigator who specializes in corporate intelligence. Very expensive, very thorough, and not particularly concerned with legal boundaries." What does that mean? It means Victoria is playing for keeps. If she's hired Chambers, she's prepared to do whatever it takes to get control of Sterling Enterprises. I pulled into a parking garage near MIT, needing time to think. The pieces were starting to fit together. Victoria hadn't just discovered my grandmother's secret recently. She'd been investigating it for months. The forged documents weren't a desperate last-minute play. They were part of a carefully orchestrated campaign. "Patterson, I need you to be completely honest with me. How much is Sterling Enterprises really worth?" Another pause. "Based on current market valuations, approximately $8.7 billion. I nearly dropped the phone. "Billion? With a B?" "Your grandmother was a financial genius, Maya. She saw opportunities others missed and had the patience to let investments mature. Over decades, Sterling Enterprises isn't just a holding company. It's one of the most valuable privately held corporations in the country. $8.7 billion. No wonder Victoria was willing to hire private investigators and forge documents. This wasn't about family legacy or personal ambition. This was about power on a scale I'd never imagined. "There's something else," Patterson continued. "The board meeting tomorrow isn't just about confirming Victoria as CEO. She's planning to sell the company." "What?" She's been in negotiations with Blackstone Capital for weeks. They want to break up Sterling Enterprises and sell the pieces to the highest bidders. Your grandmother's life work would be dismantled within a year. The betrayal was breathtaking. Not only was Victoria stealing the company, she was planning to destroy it for short-term profit. Thousands of jobs would be lost. Decades of carefully built partnerships would be shattered. Everything my grandmother had protected would be sacrificed for Victoria's immediate gain. "I have to get those documents," I said. "Tonight. Maya, listen to me. Chambers has a reputation for escalating situations when his clients' interests are threatened. If you go back to that house, then what do you suggest? Let Victoria sell my grandmother's legacy to vultures." "There might be another way." Patterson's voice carried a note of reluctant hope. "Your grandmother was paranoid about security, but she was also practical. She wouldn't have put all her eggs in one basket." "What do you mean?" "She might have hidden copies of the crucial documents somewhere else, somewhere only you would think to look." I closed my eyes, trying to remember conversations with my grandmother about hiding places and secret treasures. She'd loved games and puzzles, always challenging me to think creatively about problems. "Her art studio," I said suddenly. She converted the carriage house behind the main house into a private studio. She was always painting there when I visited. Would Victoria know about it? I doubt it. She never spent time with grandmother the way I did. She was always too busy with her career to visit. It's worth checking. But Maya, if you're going back there, you need backup. I'm calling a security firm that works with our corporate clients. They can provide protection." "No," I said quickly. "If Victoria sees professional security, she'll know I'm serious about fighting her. Right now, she still thinks I'm just the naive artist who doesn't understand business. Let her keep thinking that." I hung up and sat in the parking garage, weighing my options. Going back to the house was dangerous, but letting Victoria succeed was unthinkable. My grandmother had trusted me with her life's work. I couldn't let her down, but first, I needed to understand exactly what I was fighting for. I opened the portfolio I'd taken from the grandfather clock and began reading through the financial statements more carefully. The numbers were staggering, but it was the company's structure that impressed me most. Sterling Enterprises wasn't just about accumulating wealth, it was about creating value. The pharmaceutical company they'd acquired was developing treatments for rare diseases that larger companies ignored because the markets weren't profitable enough. The renewable energy investments were funding research into technologies that could revolutionize how the world generated power. The real estate holdings included affordable housing projects that provided quality homes for working families. My grandmother hadn't just built a business empire, she'd built a force for good in the world, and Victoria wanted to sell it all to the highest bidder. I thought about the conversation I'd overheard at the house. Victoria saw this as just another business transaction. She'd never understood that some things were more valuable than money. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop interfering or face the consequences. This is your only warning." Chambers. He knew I'd escaped the house and was trying to intimidate me into backing down. The fact that he had my number meant he'd been monitoring my communications. I turned off my phone and removed the battery, remembering spy movies where people were tracked through their devices. I might not have Victoria's business education, but I'd always been good at paying attention to details others missed. The carriage house would have to wait until dark. In the meantime, I needed to learn everything I could about Robert Chambers and his methods. I drove to the Boston Public Library and used their public computers to research my adversary. What I found was disturbing. Chambers had worked for several major corporations involved in hostile takeovers. His methods included surveillance, intimidation, and what one lawsuit described as systematic harassment of opposition parties. He'd been accused of breaking into offices, intercepting communications, and in one case, orchestrating a campaign of psychological pressure that had driven a rival executive to a nervous breakdown. And Victoria had hired him to help steal my inheritance, I printed out everything I could find about Chambers and his previous cases, then spent the afternoon studying Sterling Enterprises' corporate structure. If I was going to protect my grandmother's legacy, I needed to understand exactly how the company operated. The more I learned, the more impressed I became with my grandmother's strategic thinking. She'd created multiple layers of protection against hostile takeovers. Board positions were structured to prevent any single person from gaining complete control. Key assets were held through subsidiaries that would be difficult to untangle quickly. Stock ownership was distributed among employee pension funds and charitable foundations. Victoria's plan to sell the company would require overcoming all these protections. She'd need to convince the board, satisfy the subsidiary stakeholders, and navigate a maze of legal requirements. The forged succession documents were just the first step in what would be a complex campaign. But there was one weakness in my grandmother's armor. The CEO position carried special voting rights that could override many of the protections if wielded carefully. With those rights, Victoria could potentially force through a sale before the other stakeholders could mount effective resistance. As evening approached, I made my way back toward Beacon Hill. The house was dark, except for a single light in the front window. Someone was still watching. I parked 6 blocks away and approached through the network of back alleys and garden paths that connected the historic neighborhood. The carriage house sat behind the main house, connected by a brick pathway that was hidden from street view. I'd spent countless hours there as a child, watching my grandmother paint landscapes and portraits while she told me stories about her travels around the world. Stories that now took on new meaning. She'd probably been visiting Sterling Enterprises properties and business partners, building relationships and overseeing investments while maintaining the fiction that she was just an elderly woman with artistic hobbies. The studio was locked, but I remembered where she'd hidden the spare key, inside a fake rock near the garden gate. The lock turned easily, and I slipped inside, using the flashlight on my phone to navigate. The space was exactly as I remembered. Easels and canvases, paint supplies organized with military precision, and the comfortable chair where my grandmother would sit to critique my childhood attempts at art. But now I noticed things I'd missed before. The filing cabinets in the corner weren't for art supplies. They were professional office equipment. The computer on the desk wasn't the simple setup of a hobbyist. It was a high-end business machine with multiple monitors, and the telephone system was far more sophisticated than necessary for someone who supposedly lived alone and rarely used technology. This hadn't been just an art studio. It had been my grandmother's secret command center. I began searching systematically, looking for hidden compartments or concealed safes. My grandmother had always taught me that the best hiding places were in plain sight, disguised as something ordinary. I found it behind a painting of the Boston Harbor, a painting I'd watched her work on during dozens of visits. The canvas was hinged and concealed a wall safe with an electronic lock. The display showed that it required a 6-digit code. I tried her birthday, then mine, then various combinations of family dates. Nothing worked. I sat back, frustrated, trying to think like my grandmother. What numbers would be meaningful to her but not obvious to others? Then I remembered the incorporation date of Sterling Enterprises, 1952. I tried various combinations, 1952-100, of 1952-521900. The lock remained sealed. As I stared at the painting that concealed the safe, something caught my eye. In the corner of the canvas, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it, my grandmother had painted 6 tiny numbers, 03147. I tried the code. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside was another leather portfolio, this one marked, Final Instructions, Maya Chen only. My hands shook as I opened it and began reading. My dearest Maya, if you found this safe, it means you've already discovered the documents in the house and realized the scope of what I've built. It also means Victoria has shown her true nature and is attempting to steal what isn't rightfully hers. The documents in this portfolio contain everything you need to stop her. proof of her conspiracy with Robert Chambers, evidence of her plans to sell the company, and most importantly, documentation of her own criminal activities that she thinks no one knows about. Victoria has been embezzling money from her clients at Goldman Sachs. Small amounts, carefully hidden, but consistent over several years. She's built her reputation on the theft of other people's work and ideas. I've been documenting her activities through private investigators of my own. Use this information wisely. Victoria is dangerous when cornered, and she has powerful allies. But remember, sometimes the best defense is a good offense. The real board meeting is scheduled for next week, not tomorrow. Victoria is lying about the timeline to create panic and force quick decisions. You have time to prepare your strategy. Trust Patterson completely. He's been more than my lawyer. He's been my friend and confidant for 30 years. He'll help you navigate the complexities of corporate governance. Most importantly, remember that Sterling Enterprises isn't just about money. It's about responsibility. Every decision you make will affect thousands of employees and millions of customers. Don't let personal vendetta cloud your judgment. Be better than Victoria. Be better than me. Build something that will outlast us all. Your loving grandmother, Margaret. I stared at the documents in amazement. My grandmother had been playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. She'd known about Victoria's embezzlement, her partnership with Chambers, even her plans to sell the company, and she'd gathered evidence to stop all of it. But there was something else in the portfolio that made my blood run cold. Photographs of Victoria meeting with executives from Blackstone Capital, taken weeks before my grandmother's death. She'd been planning this takeover while my grandmother was still alive, possibly accelerating her timeline when she realized how sick our grandmother was becoming. The betrayal was complete. Victoria hadn't just stolen my inheritance, she'd stolen time from our grandmother's final days by forcing her to spend them gathering evidence and preparing defenses instead of simply enjoying her remaining time with family. I carefully repacked the documents and prepared to leave the studio. But as I reached for the door handle, I heard voices outside. "She has to be here somewhere," Victoria's voice cut through the night air. "Her grandmother's car is gone from the garage, which means Maya took it. She knows about this place." Motion sensors picked up activity in the carriage house 5 minutes ago, Chambers replied. "She's inside." I was trapped again. But this time I had what I needed to fight back. I turned off my flashlight and moved away from the door, listening as they approached. Through the window, I could see flashlight beams dancing across the garden. They were being systematic, professional, but they'd made one mistake. They assumed I was as helpless and naive as Victoria had always believed. I pulled out my phone, put the battery back in, and called Patterson's emergency number. "It's Maya," I whispered when he answered. "I found everything. The complete evidence file. But Victoria and Chambers have me cornered in the carriage house. I'm calling the police. No, I have a better idea. How quickly can you convene an emergency board meeting? Tonight? Maya, it's nearly midnight. Victoria thinks she's in control because she believes I'm scared and unprepared. Let's show her how wrong she is. Call every board member. Tell them the real CEO of Sterling Enterprises wants to address some urgent security concerns." Outside, I could hear Victoria trying the door handle. In moments, they'd figure out how to get inside. "Maya, are you sure about this? Once you step into that boardroom as CEO, there's no going back. Your life will never be the same." I thought about my grandmother's final letter, about the responsibility I was accepting, about the thousands of employees whose livelihoods depended on keeping Sterling Enterprises intact. "I'm sure," I said. It's time Victoria learned what it means to cross a Sterling. The door handle turned, and I prepared to face my sister's betrayal head-on. The real battle for Sterling Enterprises was about to begin. The door to the carriage house swung open just as Patterson confirmed the emergency board meeting for 2 a.m. Victoria stepped inside, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor. followed by Chambers, whose bulk filled the doorframe behind her. "Hello, Maya," Victoria said, her voice carrying that false sweetness she'd perfected in childhood. "We've been looking for you." I stood slowly, the portfolio clutched against my chest, and faced my sister across the art studio where our grandmother had spent her final years secretly managing a billion-dollar empire. "I'm sure you have." Victoria's eyes immediately locked onto the portfolio. "What do you have there?" "Family history," I replied calmly. "You know how interested I've always been in our heritage." Chambers stepped forward, his hand moving toward his jacket. "Miss Chen, I think it would be best if you handed over whatever documents you've found. This situation doesn't need to escalate." "Escalate?" I laughed, the sound sharper than I intended. "You mean like hiring a private investigator to intimidate family members? Like forging legal documents? Like planning to dismember a company that employs 30,000 people?" Victoria's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "Maya, you don't understand what you're dealing with. Grandmother's business interests are complicated. They require sophisticated management, not amateur enthusiasm." "Sophisticated like embezzling from your Goldman Sachs clients?" The silence that followed was electric. Victoria's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, fear, anger, and finally a kind of resigned determination that I found deeply unsettling. "I don't know what you think you found," she said carefully, "but you're playing a dangerous game. Corporate litigation can destroy lives, Maya. Reputations, careers, financial security, all gone because someone thought they understood documents they weren't qualified to interpret." "Is that a threat?" "It's reality," Chambers interjected, taking another step closer. "Family disputes get ugly fast. Things get said that can't be unsaid. Evidence gets misinterpreted. People get hurt." I backed toward the window, calculating distances and escape routes. But more importantly, I was buying time. Patterson would be making calls, gathering the board members, and preparing the evidence I'd found. Every minute I kept Victoria and Chambers occupied was a minute closer to exposing their conspiracy. "You know what's interesting about our grandmother?" I said, moving slowly around the easel that held her final painting. "Everyone thought she was just a sweet old lady who painted landscapes. But she was actually one of the most successful business executives in the country." "Grandmother was senile," Victoria snapped. "She barely knew what day it was toward the end." "Really?" "Because the documents I found suggest she was sharp enough to document your embezzlement activities at Goldman Sachs. Transaction records, offshore, account transfers, even photographs of your meetings with clients whose money you were stealing." Victoria's composure cracked completely. "You're lying." "Am I?" I pulled out one of the photographs from the portfolio, Victoria shaking hands with a Blackstone Capital executive outside a restaurant. "This was taken 3 weeks before grandmother died. You were already planning to sell Sterling Enterprises while she was fighting cancer." The room felt charged with electricity. Victoria's breathing had become rapid and shallow, while Chambers was studying me with the focused attention of a predator evaluating prey. "Maya," Victoria said, her voice now carrying a pleading note. "We're family. We can work this out. There's enough money for both of us. We don't need to destroy each other." "You're right," I agreed. "We don't need to destroy each other. That's why I'm giving you a choice." I reached into my jacket and pulled out my phone, showing them Patterson's number on the screen. "I can call off the emergency board meeting I just requested. We can sit down tomorrow morning with lawyers and work out a fair division of assets. You can keep your position at Goldman Sachs. I'll take responsibility for Sterling Enterprises. And we'll both pretend this never happened." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "What's the alternative?" "The alternative is that in 90 minutes, I present the complete evidence of your criminal activities to Sterling Enterprises' board of directors. They'll immediately notify the SEC, the FBI, and your supervisors at Goldman Sachs. By morning, your career will be over and you'll be facing federal charges for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy." The silence stretched between us like a tightrope. I could see Victoria weighing her options, calculating risks and benefits the way she'd been trained to analyze investments. "You're bluffing," she said finally. "You don't have the backbone for corporate warfare." "Try me." Chambers shifted his. "Wait," and I caught the glint of something metallic under his jacket. This was about to get very dangerous, very quickly. "Victoria," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Call off your attack dog. Whatever you're paying Chambers isn't worth going to prison for assault. Mr. Chambers is here to protect legitimate business interests," Victoria replied, but I noticed she took a step back from him. "Mr. Chambers is here because you're desperate," I corrected. "Because you know that once the board sees the evidence, they'll realize you've been planning to destroy everything our grandmother built." My phone buzzed with a text from Patterson. "Board members confirmed. Meeting set for 2 a.m. at Sterling Enterprises headquarters. Security team standing by." Victoria caught me reading the message. "What does it say?" "Game over," I replied, showing her the screen. The transformation in my sister was immediate and terrifying. The mask of civility disappeared completely, replaced by raw desperation. "Robert," she said quietly, "we can't let her reach that meeting." "Victoria, no," I said, backing toward the door. "This ends now. The evidence is already with Patterson. Even if something happens to me, the board will still see everything." "Not if the documents are destroyed," Chambers said, moving to block my exit. "Not if you're too distraught over your grandmother's death to attend any meetings." The threat was clear. They were planning to eliminate me and destroy the evidence, then claim I'd had some kind of breakdown. It would buy Victoria enough time to solidify her position and make the evidence disappear permanently. "You're both insane," I said. "This is my grandmother's art studio. There are security cameras, neighbors, witnesses. You can't just make me disappear." "Accidents happen," Victoria said coldly, "especially to people who don't understand how dangerous it is to play with forces beyond their comprehension." I realized with crystal clarity that I'd underestimated my sister's desperation. She wasn't just willing to steal my inheritance, she was willing to kill for it, but she'd also underestimated me. "You're right about one thing," I said, reaching behind me to trigger the silent alarm system my grandmother had installed in the studio. "I don't understand corporate warfare, but I understand family loyalty, and I understand justice." Red lights began flashing silently around the room. The alarm was connected directly to Patterson's security firm and the local police. Help was already on the way. "What did you do?" Victoria demanded. "I did what grandmother taught me to do," I replied. "I prepared for the worst while hoping for the best." Chambers lunged forward, but I was already moving. Years of yoga and rock climbing had given me better reflexes than he'd expected. I rolled behind the easel and came up holding one of my grandmother's palette knives, not much of a weapon, but enough to keep him at distance. "Maya, stop this!" Victoria shouted. "You're making everything worse." "I'm making it honest," I shot back. For the first time in months, everyone's showing their true colors. The sound of sirens began wailing in the distance. Chambers froze, his hand still reaching toward his jacket. Victoria's face cycled through disbelief, rage, and finally, a kind of defeated calculation. "This isn't over," she said, straightening her jacket with shaking hands. "You have no idea what you've started." "I know exactly what I've started," I replied. "I've started the end of your criminal enterprise." The sirens were getting closer. Chambers was already moving toward the back exit, abandoning Victoria without a second thought. Professional loyalty only extended so far when federal charges were on the table. "Wait," Victoria called after him, but he was gone, disappeared into the network of back alleys that connected the historic neighborhood. My sister and I stood alone in the art studio, surrounded by our grandmother's paintings and the wreckage of our family relationship. For a moment, I saw not the calculating corporate predator who'd tried to steal my inheritance, but the little girl who used to build blanket forts with me on rainy afternoons. "It didn't have to be this way," I said softly. "Yes, it did," Victoria replied, her voice hollow. "You were always grandmother's favorite. Even when we were children, she saw something in you that she never saw in me." "She saw kindness," I said. "She saw someone who cared about other people, not just personal gain." "And look where it got her," Victoria laughed bitterly. "Dead at 78, having spent her entire life hiding from her own family because she was afraid of what they might do for money." The police cars were pulling into the front driveway now, their red and blue lights painting strange shadows on the studio walls. In minutes, this would all be over. Victoria would be arrested, the evidence would be secured, and I would officially become the head of Sterling Enterprises. But I felt no triumph, only a deep sadness for the family we'd lost and the trust that had been shattered beyond repair. "Victoria," I said as the police knocked on the front door of the main house, "it's not too late to do the right thing. Cooperate with the authorities. Return the money you stole. Help undo the damage you've caused." She looked at me with something that might have been pity. "You still don't understand, do you? This isn't about right and wrong, Maya. This is about power and survival. Grandmother knew that. She spent 60 years hiding because she understood that family will destroy you faster than enemies ever could. She was wrong," I said firmly. "And so are you." The police were in the house now, following the alarm signal to the carriage house. Victoria straightened her shoulders and walked toward the door with the dignity of someone who'd already accepted defeat. "Maybe," she said, pausing, "at the threshold. But when you're sitting in that CEO chair, making decisions that affect billions of dollars and thousands of lives, remember this moment. Remember what it felt like to realize that your own sister was willing to kill you for money. And ask yourself, if you're really so different from the rest of us." She opened the door and walked out to meet the police, leaving me alone with my grandmother's paintings and the weight of the empire I'd just inherited. 20 minutes later, Patterson arrived with a team of lawyers and security specialists. Victoria had been arrested on charges of criminal conspiracy and was being held pending a more thorough investigation into her embezzlement activities. Chambers had vanished, but federal authorities were already tracking his movements and freezing his assets. "The board meeting is still on," Patterson reported as we secured the evidence. "Word has already leaked about tonight's events. The members want to meet their new CEO and understand the full scope of what's been happening." I looked around the art studio one last time, memorizing the space where my grandmother had spent her final years protecting everything she'd built. The paintings on the walls weren't just landscapes and portraits. They were maps of properties and businesses, coded records of investments and partnerships, hidden in plain sight. She'd been a genius, but she'd also been deeply alone. She'd spent decades building walls to protect herself from the kind of betrayal I'd just experienced, and those walls had ultimately isolated her from everyone she loved. I wasn't going to make the same mistake. "Patterson," I said, gathering the portfolio of evidence, "I want to make some changes to the board structure. I want employee representatives, community leaders, and ethics oversight built into every major decision." "That's unusual for a private corporation," he replied carefully. "Good. Unusual means Victoria and people like her will have a harder time corrupting it." As we walked toward the car that would take me to Sterling Enterprises headquarters for my first board meeting as CEO, I thought about my grandmother's final letter. She'd warned me that every decision would affect thousands of employees and millions of customers. She'd told me to be better than Victoria, better than her, but mostly, she'd told me to build something that would outlast us all. Standing in the lobby of Sterling Enterprises at 1:45 a.m., surrounded by board members who'd been awakened in the middle of the night to meet their mysterious new CEO, I realized that my real education was just beginning. The corporate warfare with Victoria had been preparation for the much larger battles ahead. Running a multi-billion-dollar corporation meant facing down hostile takeovers, managing complex global operations, and making decisions that would ripple through the economy for decades. But first, I had to prove to the board that the quiet artist, who'd lived paycheck to paycheck for years, was capable of protecting and growing the empire their previous CEO had built in secret. As Patterson introduced me to the assembled directors, I caught sight of my reflection in the conference room's wall of windows. I looked different somehow, older, more confident, carrying myself with an authority I hadn't possessed 12 hours earlier. "Ladies and gentlemen," Patterson announced, "I'd like you to meet Maya Chen, the rightful heir and new CEO of Sterling Enterprises." The room fell silent as I stepped forward, knowing that the next few hours would determine not just my future, but the future of everything my grandmother had built. The real test of my worthiness was about to begin. The Sterling Enterprises boardroom occupied the entire 42nd floor of the Prudential Tower, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Boston's skyline. At 2 a.m., the city sparkled below us like a circuit board, and I couldn't help but think how appropriate that was. I was about to learn how to operate the switches that controlled a significant portion of that economic machinery. 12 board members sat around the mahogany conference table, their faces ranging from curious to skeptical to openly hostile. These weren't just wealthy investors. They were titans of industry, former cabinet secretaries, and academic luminaries who'd guided Sterling Enterprises' growth for decades while maintaining the fiction that they were advising a reclusive elderly woman. "Before we begin," said Margaret Whitfield, the silver-haired woman who served as board chair, "I think we all deserve some explanation. When Elizabeth Sterling recruited us over the years, she promised transparency and integrity. Learning that she's been dead for over 60 years while someone else used her identity raises serious questions about everything we thought we knew." Patterson stood to address the room. "Mrs. Whitfield, I understand your concerns, but I can assure you that Margaret Chen, who you knew as Elizabeth Sterling, maintained the highest standards of corporate governance throughout her tenure. The deception was necessary for her personal safety, not to hide any impropriety." "Personal safety from what?" asked Dr. Richard Holbrook, former Secretary of Commerce and current head of the Audit Committee. "And more importantly, why should we believe that her granddaughter is qualified to step into her shoes?" I had been listening silently, studying the faces around the table, and trying to read the power dynamics in the room. My grandmother had chosen these people carefully, but that didn't mean they would automatically accept me. "Dr. Holbrook," I said, standing up, "you're right to question my qualifications. 2 days ago, I was a freelance graphic designer living paycheck to paycheck. I have no formal business education, no corporate experience, and no track record of managing anything larger than my own student loan debt." The honesty clearly surprised them. Several board members exchanged glances, unsure whether I was displaying refreshing candor or disqualifying incompetence. "However," I continued, "I do have something my grandmother valued above credentials: judgment. And my judgment tells me that this company needs to make some fundamental changes to survive what's coming next." "What do you mean by that?" asked Elena Rodriguez, the youngest board member and CEO of a major biotech firm. I activated the room's presentation system and began displaying the evidence Patterson had prepared. "What I mean is that Victoria's attempted coup wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of systemic vulnerabilities that make Sterling Enterprises a target for hostile takeovers, corporate raiders, and worse." The first slide showed Victoria's forged documents alongside authentication analysis proving they were fake. The second revealed her embezzlement activities at Goldman Sachs. The third displayed her secret negotiations with Blackstone Capital to sell the company piece by piece. "Your sister was planning to destroy Sterling Enterprises," said Thomas Chen, no relation despite the name, former Federal Reserve governor. "But she's been arrested. The threat is over." No, sir, it's not. I advanced to the next slide, showing a web diagram that connected Victoria to a network of other corporate executives and investment firms. Victoria didn't come up with this plan in isolation. She's part of a larger ecosystem of people who specialize in identifying undervalued private companies and engineering takeovers. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Margaret. Whitfield leaned forward. Are you saying there are others out there who know about Sterling Enterprises? I'm saying that my grandmother's death created a window of vulnerability that attracted predators. Victoria was just the first one to move. But now that the company's existence is becoming public knowledge, we can expect more sophisticated attacks. IT. Clicked to the next slide, showing newspaper headlines from the past 12 hours. Word of Victoria's arrest had leaked, and business journalists were already digging into the story. By morning, Sterling Enterprises would be front-page news across the financial press. The age of secrecy is over, I said. For better or worse, this company is about to become very public. The question is whether we're going to control that narrative or let others control it for us. Dr. Holbrook was studying the financial projections I'd included in the presentation. These numbers suggest that disclosure could actually benefit the company. Our subsidiaries' stock prices would likely rise if investors knew they were backed by Sterling Enterprises resources. Exactly. But only if we position ourselves correctly. I advanced to my final slide, showing a proposed restructuring plan I'd worked on during the drive to the office. I'm recommending that we go public, voluntarily, on our own terms, before someone forces our hand. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Half the board members started talking at once, their voices ranging from intrigued to incredulous to indignant. You want to take Sterling Enterprises public? Margaret Whitfield's voice cut through the chaos. Do you have any idea what that would mean? Quarterly earnings reports, SEC oversight, shareholder lawsuits, hostile takeover attempts, all of which we're going to face anyway, I replied calmly. The difference is whether we do it from a position of strength or weakness. Elena Rodriguez was nodding thoughtfully. She has a point. If we go public voluntarily, we can structure the IPO to maintain control while raising capital for expansion. But if we're forced into disclosure by investigations or media attention, we lose control of the process, finished Thomas Chen. The vultures start circling before we're ready to defend ourselves. I could see the board members beginning to engage with the idea, their business instincts overriding their initial skepticism. These were people who'd built careers on identifying opportunities disguised as problems. There's something else, I said, pulling up a confidential memo I'd found in my grandmother's files. She'd been considering this move herself. She was just waiting for the right moment and the right successor. The memo, dated 6 months before her death, outlined concerns about maintaining secrecy in an increasingly connected world. She'd identified many of the same vulnerabilities I was highlighting, and had begun developing contingency plans for controlled disclosure. She knew this day would come, I continued. She just didn't expect it to come so soon, or under such circumstances. Margaret Whitfield was rereading the memo, her expression thoughtful. Elizabeth always was 3 steps ahead of everyone else. If she thought disclosure was inevitable, then maybe we should trust her judgment, said Dr. Holbrook. But that still doesn't answer the fundamental question. Are you prepared to be the public face of a Fortune 100 company? It was the moment of truth. I could see in their faces that they wanted to believe in me, but they needed more than potential. They needed proof that I could handle the pressure and complexity of running a global enterprise. Dr. Holbrook, I can't prove to you that I'm ready for this job, but I can prove that I understand what it requires. I turned off the presentation system and faced the board directly. My grandmother didn't choose me because I was the most qualified candidate. She chose me because she believed I would protect what she built while having the wisdom to change what needed changing. I paused, making eye contact with each board member. Sterling Enterprises has been successful because it's been patient, strategic, and focused on long-term value rather than short-term profits. Those principles don't require an MBA or decades of corporate experience. They require character and judgment. Character and judgment are important, acknowledged Elena Rodriguez. But they're not sufficient. Running a public company requires technical expertise, regulatory knowledge, media savvy, which is why I'm not planning to do it alone. I smiled, having anticipated this objection. I'm proposing a new management structure. I'll serve as chairman and CEO, responsible for strategic vision and stakeholder relations. But I want to recruit the best operational talent available to handle day-to-day management. I outlined my plan for a distributed leadership model, with experienced executives leading each major division while reporting to a core strategy team. It would preserve the company's values while bringing in the expertise needed to navigate public markets. It's unconventional, admitted Thomas Chen, but it could work. The chairman's CEO role would give you ultimate authority while allowing specialists to handle their areas of expertise. More importantly, added Margaret Whitfield, it would show the market that Sterling Enterprises is serious about professional management. Investors worry about family-controlled companies where unqualified relatives get handed leadership positions. The mood in the room was shifting. I could sense the board members moving from skepticism to cautious optimism. They were beginning to see not just the risks of my proposal, but its potential benefits. There's one more thing, I said, producing the final document from my grandmother's portfolio. She left specific instructions for this transition, not just the succession plan, but guidelines for going public if circumstances required it. The document was remarkable in its foresight. My grandmother had anticipated everything from IPO pricing strategies to media relations plans to corporate governance structures. She'd even identified potential candidates for key executive positions, complete with background research and compatibility assessments. She really was 3 steps ahead, murmured Dr. Holbrook, studying the personnel recommendations. Some of these people are exactly who I would have suggested. The question, said Margaret Whitfield, is whether we're prepared to move this quickly. Going public is a massive undertaking under the best circumstances. Doing it while managing a family crisis and potential criminal investigations is exactly why we need to act fast, I finished. Every day we wait is another day for hostile actors to position themselves against us. Victoria may be in jail, but the people who were backing her are still out there. Patterson spoke up for the first time in an hour. The SEC has already expressed interest in reviewing Sterling Enterprises operations as part of Victoria's case. If we voluntarily file for an IPO, we can control that process rather than having it imposed on us. Elena Rodriguez was already pulling up financial models on her tablet. Based on comparable companies and our asset base, we could be looking at a valuation of $15 to $20 billion. That would make it one of the largest IPOs in history. The number hung in the air like electricity. $20 billion. It was almost impossible to comprehend, let alone manage responsibly. Which brings us back to the central question, said Margaret Whitfield. Maya, are you prepared for that level of responsibility? For the scrutiny, the pressure, the impossible decisions you'll have to make? I thought about the past 24 hours, discovering my grandmother's secret, escaping Victoria's threats, facing down armed conspirators in an art studio. Each crisis had revealed capabilities I hadn't known I possessed. Mrs. Whitfield, I can't promise I'll never make mistakes, but I can promise that I'll make them for the right reasons, and I'll learn from them quickly. I stood up and walked to the windows, looking out at the city that would wake up tomorrow to news of Sterling Enterprises' existence. My grandmother spent 60 years building something extraordinary while hiding in plain sight. She created a company that employs 30,000 people, funds breakthrough medical research, develops clean energy technology, and provides affordable housing for working families. She did all of that while living modestly and asking for nothing. In return, I turned back to face the board. That's the legacy I'm inheriting. Not just the money or the power, but the responsibility to use both wisely. If you believe I can live up to that standard, then I'm ready to begin. If not, then help me find someone who can. The silence that followed was different from the earlier skepticism. These were experienced leaders taking the measure of a potential colleague, not critics looking for weaknesses to exploit. Finally, Margaret Whitfield spoke. All in favor of proceeding with IPO preparations under Maya Chen's leadership? 12. Hands rose around the table. Motion carried unanimously. She smiled for the first time that night. Welcome to the big leagues, Madam Chairman. Your first board meeting as a public company CEO is scheduled for next Monday. I suggest you use the weekend to prepare. As the board members filed out, offering congratulations and promises of support, I remained at the windows watching the sunrise paint Boston's skyline in shades of gold and crimson. In less than a week, I would be responsible for managing one of the largest companies in the world. But first, I had to survive the media storm that would begin the moment the markets opened. Patterson joined me at the windows. Second thoughts? Constantly, I admitted. But not about the decision, about everything else I don't know yet. He handed me a leather portfolio, this one new, with my name embossed in gold letters. Your grandmother left detailed transition plans for the first 100 days. Consider it a roadmap for the journey ahead. I opened the portfolio and found the first page of what would become my corporate education. My grandmother's handwriting was clear and confident. Day 1. Remember that every decision affects real people living real lives. Never let the numbers make you forget the humans behind them. It was exactly the reminder I needed as I prepared to step into a world where billions of dollars could be won or lost with a single miscalculation. The transformation from struggling artist to Fortune 100 CEO was complete. Now I had to prove I deserved the title. The Wall Street Journal broke the story at 6:47 a.m. with a headline that made my coffee taste like ash. Mystery heiress emerges from decades-long deception to control $20 billion empire. By 7:15, CNBC was running a special segment called The Sterling Scandal. And by 8, my phone had received 847 missed calls from reporters, investors, and what I could only assume were various species of corporate vultures. I sat in my grandmother's, my executive office on the 43rd floor, watching the media feeding frenzy unfold on the bank of monitors Patterson had installed overnight. The coverage ranged from breathless fascination to cynical skepticism, but one theme emerged consistently. The art student who'd inherited a fortune was in way over her head. Maya Chen's only business experience appears to be selling handmade jewelry at craft fairs, sneered a commentator on Bloomberg television. The idea that she's qualified to run a Fortune 100 company is absurd. The markets are clearly nervous, added the anchor. Sterling Enterprises subsidiary stocks are down an average of 12% in pre-market trading, wiping out nearly $2 billion in value. Sarah Morrison, my newly appointed chief of staff, recruited from McKinsey at Margaret Whitfield's recommendation, entered with a stack of urgent messages. The SEC wants a conference call at noon. Goldman Sachs is requesting an immediate meeting about Victoria's case. And someone from 60 Minutes is offering exclusivity if you'll sit for an interview this afternoon. I turned away from the monitors, feeling overwhelmed by the sheer velocity of corporate communications. What's our priority? Damage control? Sarah replied without hesitation. The market uncertainty is creating a cascading effect. If we don't stabilize confidence quickly, you could lose 20% of the company's value before lunch. The irony wasn't lost on me. 24 hours ago, I'd been worried about paying rent. Now I was watching billions of dollars evaporate in real time because strangers had opinions about my qualifications. Patterson is drafting a press release, Sarah continued. But we need to decide on messaging strategy. Do we emphasize continuity? With your grandmother's leadership, Or do we position this as a new vision for the company? Before I could answer, my assistant announced that Elena Rodriguez was on line 1 with an urgent update from the emergency leadership team we'd assembled. During the night, Maya, Elena's voice crackled through the speakerphone. We've got a problem. 3 major institutional investors are requesting immediate meetings to discuss their holdings. They're spooked by the coverage and want assurances that their investments are secure. What kind of assurances? Proof that you're not going to run the company into the ground through inexperience. They want to see a detailed transition plan, financial projections, and preferably some adult supervision in the form of experienced executives. I looked at Sarah, who was already pulling up the executive recruitment files my grandmother had prepared. How quickly can we get the leadership team in place? The candidates your grandmother identified? Sarah scrolled through the list. Most of them are currently employed elsewhere. Recruiting them could take months, and we'd need to offer significant incentives to make them leave their current positions. What about interim solutions? There's a possibility. Elena's voice came through the speaker again. David Park, former CEO of Meridian Holdings, is between positions after selling his company last year. He's got exactly the kind of resume that would calm institutional investors. I pulled up Park's background on my computer. Harvard MBA, 30 years of experience, track record of successful IPOs and corporate restructuring. On paper, he was everything the markets wanted in a CEO. What's the catch? I asked, knowing there had to be one. He's expensive, he's demanding, and he doesn't like taking direction from board chairs who lack operating experience, Elena admitted. But he could provide the credibility you need to stabilize the situation. The phone rang again. My assistant's voice came through the intercom. Ms. Chen, it's James Patterson on line 2. He says it's urgent regarding Victoria's legal situation. I put Elena on hold and took Patterson's call. What's wrong? Victoria made bail this morning. Her lawyers are claiming prosecutorial overreach and demanding that all evidence related to Sterling Enterprises be excluded from criminal proceedings. They're arguing that the company's secrecy makes any documentation inherently suspect. My stomach dropped. Can they do that? They can try. More importantly, Victoria's giving interviews to financial reporters. She's claiming that you manipulated a dying elderly woman and forged documents to steal the company from its rightful heir. I pulled up the news feeds and found Victoria's face on CNBC, looking perfectly composed and professionally indignant. The Chiron read, Alleged victim speaks out. Sister claims corporate theft. My grandmother was vulnerable in her final months, Victoria was telling the interviewer. Maya took advantage of that vulnerability to convince her to change succession, plans that had been in place for years. The documents she's claiming as evidence are either fabricated or were signed under duress. The interviewer nodded sympathetically. You're saying your sister essentially stole a $20 billion company? I'm saying that the real Elizabeth Sterling's wishes are being perverted by someone who has no qualifications to run a lemonade stand, much less a Fortune 100 corporation. I muted the television, feeling sick. Victoria was good at this, playing the victim while undermining my credibility. The media was eating it up because it fit their narrative of the incompetent heiress. Patterson, I said, how do we fight? This? With facts and documentation. We have overwhelming evidence of Victoria's criminal activities and forged documents. But she's trying to win in the court of public opinion while her lawyers handle the legal battle. Sarah was frantically taking notes as she listened to both conversations. We need to respond immediately. Every minute we let her narrative stand, unchallenged, it becomes more entrenched. I thought about my grandmother's advice. Sometimes the best defense is a good offense. But I also remembered her warning about not letting personal vendetta cloud my judgment. Set up the 60 Minutes interview, I decided. But also schedule a press conference for this afternoon. I want to address the allegations directly and announce our leadership transition plan. Maya, Elena's voice came through the speakerphone. Are you sure about going public so quickly? Media training takes time, and if you make a mistake, I'll make mistakes, I acknowledged. But hiding from the media makes me look guilty and incompetent. At least if I'm visible, I can control my own narrative. The next 4 hours were a crash course in corporate crisis management. Sarah brought in a media consultant who taught me how to speak in sound bites and pivot away from hostile questions. The legal team prepared talking points that wouldn't compromise Victoria's prosecution. The communications department drafted statements that would reassure investors without making promises we couldn't keep. At 2 p.m., I stood behind a podium in Sterling Enterprises' main conference room, facing a room full of reporters who looked like they were expecting blood in the water. Camera flashes popped constantly, and I could see the red lights of live television broadcasts. "Good afternoon," I began, grateful that my voice sounded steadier than I felt. "I'm Maya Chen, Chairman and CEO of Sterling Enterprises. I'm here to address the false allegations that have been made about my family and my company." I spent 10 minutes presenting the timeline of discovery, from finding my grandmother's documents to uncovering Victoria's conspiracy. I showed authentication, reports proving that my succession documents were genuine while Victoria's were forged. I displayed evidence of her embezzlement and criminal conspiracy. The allegations that I manipulated or deceived my grandmother are not just false. They're insulting to her memory, I said, looking directly into the CNN camera. Margaret Chen was one of the most brilliant business minds of her generation. She wasn't a vulnerable elderly woman who could be tricked into changing her will. She was a strategic thinker who spent years documenting her family members' characters and making informed decisions about succession. The questions came fast and aggressive. "Ms. Chen, what qualifies you to run a $20 billion company?" The same thing that qualified my grandmother: judgment, integrity, and a commitment to long-term value creation over short-term profit maximization. "But you have no business experience. How can investors trust you with their money?" "Investors should judge me by my actions, not my resume. Today I'm announcing the recruitment of David Park as Chief Operating Officer, bringing 30 years of Fortune 500 experience to our management team. We're also implementing new governance structures that will provide additional oversight and accountability." "Is it true that Sterling Enterprises is considering an IPO?" "We're exploring all options to maximize value for stakeholders while maintaining our commitment to responsible business practices." The questioning went on for 45 minutes, with reporters trying everything from gotcha questions to personal attacks. But I remembered my grandmother's lesson about staying calm under pressure and focusing on facts rather than emotions. Afterward, Sarah showed me the early social media reaction. Mixed, but better than expected. The business press is giving you credit for transparency and preparation. The general media is still skeptical, but at least you look competent. What? About the markets? Sterling subsidiary stocks are recovering, down only 5% now instead of 12%. Park's appointment announcement helped significantly. That evening, I met David Park for dinner at Top of the Hub, the restaurant atop the Prudential Tower. He was exactly what Central Casting would order for a Fortune 500 CEO. Silver-haired, authoritative, wearing a suit that probably cost more than I used to make in a month. "I'll be honest, Maya," he said after we'd ordered. "I'm not sure this arrangement can work. You're asking me to be COO while you retain CEO authority, but you lack the experience to make informed strategic decisions." "Then teach me," I replied. "My grandmother left detailed notes about why she thought you'd be a good fit for this company. She believed you shared her values about long-term thinking and stakeholder responsibility." Park studied me over his wine glass. Elizabeth Sterling was remarkable, but she had 60 years to develop her expertise. "You're asking me to help you compress that learning curve into 60 days. I'm asking you to help me protect what she built while positioning it for the future. The markets want experience and credibility. You have both. I have legitimacy and vision. Together, we can bridge the gap until I'm ready to lead independently." And what happens when you decide you don't need me anymore? The question revealed his real concern. He'd seen enough family-controlled companies where professional managers got discarded once the heirs felt confident enough to operate alone. David, I'm not trying to build a personality cult or prove I'm the smartest person in the room. I'm trying to build something that will outlast both of us. That requires surrounding myself with people who are better than me at specific functions. He seemed surprised by the candor. Most CEOs wouldn't admit their limitations so openly. Most CEOs inherit established companies with existing management teams. I inherited a secret empire that needs to transform into a public corporation while managing a family crisis and criminal investigations. I don't have time for ego or pretense. Park smiled for the first time that evening. Fair point. What's your timeline for going public? 6 months. Maybe less if market conditions are favorable. That's aggressive. IPO preparation usually takes at least a year. We don't have a year. Every day we remain private is another day for hostile actors to position themselves against us. Victoria's just the beginning. There are bigger predators circling now that they know Sterling Enterprises exists. I explained the intelligence we'd gathered about other corporate raiders and investment firms that specialized in breaking up private companies. The arrest of Victoria had temporarily disrupted their plans, but they would regroup quickly. You really think going public will protect you from hostile takeovers? Park asked. I think going public on our terms gives us more options than being forced into disclosure on someone else's terms. Once we're public, we can implement defensive measures like poison pills and staggered boards. While we're private, we're vulnerable to anyone with enough resources to launch a sustained attack. Park was quiet for several minutes, processing the strategic implications. Finally, he nodded. You're right about the timing. And frankly, the leadership structure you're proposing might actually work better than traditional hierarchies. Does that mean you're interested? It means I'm intrigued, but I have conditions. He outlined his requirements: complete operational authority, a substantial equity package, and clear performance metrics that would determine his long-term role with the company. They were reasonable demands from someone with his background and market value. One last question, Park said as we finished dinner. Why should I believe you won't turn into another entitled heiress once you get comfortable with power? I thought about Victoria's transformation from the sister I'd built blanket forts with to the woman who'd tried to have me killed. Power did corrupt, but I'd seen what happened when it was pursued for its own sake rather than as a tool for creating value. Because I've seen what happens to people who forget that power is a responsibility, not a privilege, I replied. My sister tried to steal everything my grandmother built because she confused ownership with entitlement. I don't want to make the same mistake. Park extended his hand across the table. When do we start? As I shook hands with my new COO, I caught sight of our reflection in the restaurant's windows. For the first time since discovering my inheritance, I looked like someone who belonged in a corporate boardroom. The transformation from struggling artist to Fortune 100 CEO was accelerating, and tomorrow would bring new challenges as we began preparing for the largest IPO in corporate history. But tonight, for the first time in days, I felt like we might actually succeed. 3 weeks into my tenure as CEO, I discovered that running a Fortune 100 company was like conducting an orchestra where half the musicians were playing different compositions and the other half were actively trying to sabotage the performance. The morning briefings alone required mastering everything from pharmaceutical patent law to renewable energy regulations to international trade disputes. David Park had proven invaluable in translating corporate complexity into actionable decisions. But even he seemed overwhelmed by the scope of Sterling Enterprises' operations. Your grandmother was essentially running 12 different companies, he told me during our daily strategy meeting. Most CEOs specialize in one industry for their entire careers. She was expert in all of them. The IPO preparation was consuming, 18-hour days, and revealing new complications with each legal document we filed. Sarah had assembled a war room of investment bankers, lawyers, and consultants who worked around the clock to untangle 60 years of deliberately obscured corporate structures. Goldman Sachs, despite Victoria's recent employment there, had been eager to lead the underwriting consortium for what they estimated would be a $25 billion offering. But our biggest challenge wasn't financial complexity. It was family warfare. Victoria had been released on bail and was conducting a sophisticated campaign to undermine my credibility while positioning herself as the rightful heir to Sterling Enterprises. Her lawyers had filed 17 separate motions challenging everything, from my grandmother's mental competency to the authenticity of corporate documents. More dangerously, she'd hired a public relations firm that specialized in corporate reputation management. "She's good at this," admitted Jennifer Walsh, our newly recruited chief communications officer, as we reviewed the latest media coverage. "Look at this New York Times piece. Questions mount about Sterling heiress's legitimacy." She's not directly quoted, but 3 sources familiar with the family situation raise concerns about your qualifications. I scanned the article, recognizing Victoria's fingerprints in every anonymous quote. She was painting a picture of an elderly woman manipulated by a granddaughter who'd been jealous of her sister's success. The narrative was compelling because it contained just enough truth to be believable. I had been struggling financially while Victoria thrived at Goldman Sachs. "What's our response strategy?" I asked. "Transparency and results," Jennifer replied. "We can't win a he-said-she-said battle with someone who has Victoria's media skills, but we can demonstrate competence through action." The timing was crucial. In 2 days, we would announce Sterling Enterprises' first quarterly results under my leadership. The numbers would either validate the market's growing confidence in our transition or confirm the skeptics' predictions of imminent collapse. David knocked on my office door, his expression grim. "We have a problem. The Meridian Pharmaceuticals division is facing a potential FDA investigation. Meridian was one of our largest subsidiaries, responsible for developing treatments for rare diseases. Any regulatory scrutiny could derail the IPO and cost us billions in market value." "What's the issue?" "Apparently, someone leaked confidential clinical trial data to medical journals before the studies were completed. The FDA is concerned about potential safety risks being hidden from regulators." I felt the familiar weight of crisis management settling on my shoulders. Who leaked the data? That's the problem. We don't know. The leak came from inside Meridian's research division, but their security protocols should have prevented unauthorized disclosure. Sarah was already pulling up Meridian's organizational chart on her tablet. "How many people had access to the clinical data?" 37 researchers, plus senior management, David replied. "We're conducting internal interviews, but if this is deliberate sabotage..." I didn't need him to finish the thought. Victoria had demonstrated that she was willing to use any weapon available to destroy my leadership. Sabotaging our pharmaceutical division would be exactly the kind of strategic warfare she'd learned at Goldman Sachs. Get me a meeting with Meridian's CEO, I decided. Today. And have our security team investigate whether anyone with access to the data has connections to Victoria or her associates. The drive to Meridian's headquarters in Cambridge gave me time to study the leaked documents. The clinical trials involved a treatment for muscular dystrophy that could potentially help thousands of children. Someone had released preliminary data suggesting serious side effects, but the context made it unclear whether these were normal fluctuations or genuine safety concerns. Dr. Angela Foster, Meridian's CEO, met me in her office overlooking the Charles River. She was a brilliant physician scientist who'd joined Sterling Enterprises because our long-term investment approach allowed her to pursue research that other companies considered too risky or unprofitable. "Maya, I want you to know that our safety protocols are impeccable," she began. "Every adverse event in our trials has been properly reported to the FDA. The leaked data was taken out of context to make normal statistical variations look alarming. Do you think this was intentional sabotage? I think someone wanted to damage our reputation and derail the IPO. The leak was carefully timed to maximize media impact while minimizing our ability to provide context. I reviewed the personnel files she'd prepared. One name caught my attention. Dr. Michael Chen, a senior researcher who'd joined Meridian 6 months earlier from a competitor company. His background check had been clean, but something about the timing bothered me. "Tell me about Dr. Chen," I said. "Brilliant scientist, excellent credentials. He came to us from Blackstone Pharmaceuticals with strong recommendations." Blackstone, the same investment firm that Victoria had been negotiating with to sell Sterling Enterprises. The connection was too convenient to be coincidental. Has Dr. Chen had access to the clinical trial data that was leaked? Dr. Foster checked her records. Yes, he's been leading the statistical analysis team. He would have had complete access to all trial data. I called David immediately. Run a complete background check on Dr. Michael Chen at Meridian, and cross-reference him with anyone connected to Blackstone Capital or Victoria's associates. While we waited for the investigation results, I faced a crucial decision about how to handle the FDA inquiry. We could be completely transparent and risk having our trials suspended, or we could provide minimal cooperation and risk appearing to hide something. What would my grandmother have done? I asked Dr. Foster. She would have chosen transparency, every time. She used to say that trust takes years to build and seconds to destroy. Any hint that we were hiding safety data would permanently damage our credibility with regulators. The afternoon brought confirmation of my suspicions. Dr. Chen had indeed been planted at Meridian by interests connected to Blackstone Capital. Our security team had discovered encrypted communications between Chen and Robert Chambers, the investigator. Victoria had hired to help steal Sterling Enterprises. "This is industrial espionage," David said grimly. Chen wasn't just leaking data. He was systematically documenting our research processes and reporting to competitors. I felt anger rising in my chest, but forced myself to think strategically. Victoria and her allies had escalated beyond family disputes into corporate warfare. They were willing to sabotage medical research that could help sick children in order to achieve their financial goals. "What's our next move?" Sarah asked. "We go on offense," I decided. "Schedule a press conference for tomorrow morning. We're going to expose the entire conspiracy." Jennifer looked concerned. "Maya, accusing your sister of industrial espionage could backfire. Without ironclad proof, it looks like you're blaming family problems for business challenges. Then we make sure our proof is ironclad." I spent the evening with our legal team, building a case that would demonstrate the scope of Victoria's conspiracy. We had Chen's communications with Chambers, documented connections between Chambers and Blackstone Capital, and evidence of coordinated attacks on Sterling Enterprises across multiple fronts. But as I reviewed the evidence, I realized something troubling. The conspiracy was bigger than just Victoria and a few corporate raiders. The pattern of attacks suggested coordination by someone with deep knowledge of financial markets and regulatory processes. "David," I said, calling him at home, "who else knew about our IPO timeline? The board, our investment bankers, the law firm, the accounting firm? Maybe 30 people total. Why? The timing of these attacks is too precise. Someone with inside knowledge is coordinating them to maximize damage at exactly the right moments." The implication was chilling. We had a mole somewhere in our inner circle, someone providing intelligence to Victoria's allies about our most sensitive strategic decisions. The next morning's press conference was held in Sterling Enterprises' main auditorium, with national media in attendance. I'd spent hours practicing my presentation with Jennifer, knowing that any mistake could be twisted into evidence of incompetence. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, "I'm here today to address a systematic campaign of industrial espionage and sabotage directed against Sterling Enterprises and its employees." I methodically presented evidence of Chen's infiltration of Meridian Pharmaceuticals, his communications with known corporate raiders, and the coordinated timing of attacks on our various business units. The documentation was overwhelming and clearly demonstrated a criminal conspiracy. This isn't about family disputes or succession planning, I continued. This is about protecting American innovation and medical research from corporate predators who would destroy promising treatments to achieve short-term financial gains. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. By afternoon, the FBI had opened an investigation into the industrial espionage allegations. Blackstone Capital issued a statement denying involvement while quietly cutting ties with several associates. And Victoria's carefully crafted media narrative began crumbling as reporters dug deeper into the conspiracy evidence. But the victory felt incomplete. We'd exposed Chen and disrupted one attack vector, but the broader threat remained. Someone was still feeding information to our enemies, and until we identified the source, Sterling Enterprises remained vulnerable. That evening, Margaret Whitfield called with disturbing news from the board level. Maya, I've been hearing rumors that some institutional investors are planning a coordinated challenge to your leadership. They're concerned about the security breaches and want to install professional management. What kind of challenge? A proxy fight. They'd nominate their own slate of directors and try to remove you as CEO at the annual meeting. I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet again. Just when we'd gained momentum against Victoria's attacks, a new threat was emerging from the financial establishment itself. Who's leading this effort? Wellington Management, Fidelity, and CalPERS are the names I'm hearing. Between them, they control about 15% of our subsidiary company's shares. If they can convince other institutional investors to join them, they could potentially control Sterling Enterprises despite my legal ownership. Institutional investors wielded enormous influence in corporate governance, and they're coordinated. Opposition could make my position untenable regardless of what the law said about inheritance rights. What's their timeline? The annual meeting is in 6 weeks. If they're going to mount a challenge, they'll need to file preliminary proxy materials within the next 2 weeks. I hung up and stared out at Boston's skyline, trying to process this new dimension of corporate warfare. Victoria's criminal conspiracy had been personal and vindictive, but ultimately amateurish. This institutional challenge would be professional, well-funded, and possibly unstoppable. David found me in my office an hour later, looking shell-shocked. Maya, we need to talk. I just got a call from my former board colleagues at Wellington Management. Let me guess, they want you to support their proxy challenge. They want me to lead it. They're offering to make me CEO if I help remove you from leadership. The betrayal shouldn't have surprised me, but it felt like a physical blow. David had become more than just a business partner. He'd been my mentor in learning corporate leadership. The idea that he might abandon me for a better offer was devastating. What did you tell them? David studied my face carefully. I told them I'd consider it. Maya, you need to understand. This isn't personal. It's about what's best for the company and its stakeholders. And you think what's best is replacing me with someone who doesn't understand my grandmother's vision or values. I think what's best is stable, experienced leadership that can navigate these challenges without creating new ones every week. We stared at each other across the conference table where we'd planned strategy for 3 weeks. I could see him weighing his options, calculating the odds of success under my leadership versus the certainty of power under institutional backing. David, I said quietly, if you take their offer, you'll be destroying everything my grandmother built. Sterling Enterprises will become just another corporation focused on quarterly earnings instead of long-term value creation. Maybe that's what it needs to be to survive. The words hung between us like a death sentence. I realized that David had never really believed in my vision for the company. He'd just seen an opportunity to position himself for advancement. When a better opportunity emerged, his loyalty evaporated. I need your answer by tomorrow morning, I said. Either you're committed to our partnership or you're part of the problem. After David left, I sat alone in the darkening office, surrounded by the weight of decisions that would affect thousands of employees and billions of dollars in economic value. For the first time since discovering my inheritance, I wondered if Victoria might have been right about my qualifications, but then I remembered my grandmother's final letter. Be better than Victoria. Be better than me. Build something that will outlast us all. The institutional investors thought they could intimidate me with their financial power and corporate connections. They were about to learn that some things were more important than money, and some people couldn't be bought at any price. The real battle for Sterling Enterprises was just beginning. David's answer came at 6 a.m. the next morning, delivered not in person, but through a formal letter submitted to the board. He was accepting Wellington Management's offer to lead the Proxy challenge and would be resigning as COO effective immediately. The corporate world's version of a knife in the back came with letterhead and legal language. I read his resignation while drinking coffee in my grandmother's kitchen, having returned to the Beacon Hill house for the first time since the confrontation in the carriage house. The familiar surroundings helped clarify my thinking in ways the corporate tower couldn't. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about preserving something worth fighting for. Sarah found me there an hour later, clutching a tablet full of urgent messages. Maya, the institutional investors filed their preliminary proxy materials this morning. They're calling for a complete board overhaul and David as interim CEO. What's their justification? Gross mismanagement, security failures, and she paused, looking uncomfortable. Questions about your mental stability under pressure. I almost laughed. It was Victoria's playbook refined by professional corporate raiders. Attack competency, question stability, position themselves as the responsible adults saving the company from family dysfunction. How much support do they have? On paper? About 30% of the outstanding shares. But proxy fights are about momentum and narrative. If they can convince other institutional investors that you're unstable, they could reach the 51% needed to seize control. I understood the mathematics of corporate warfare now. It wasn't about right and wrong, but about who could mobilize more financial firepower. Sarah, I need you to set up meetings with every major shareholder who hasn't committed to the proxy challenge. We have 5 weeks to change their minds. Maya, she said gently, these are sophisticated institutional investors. They're not going to be swayed by emotional appeals about family legacy. Then we won't make emotional appeals. We'll make business arguments they can't ignore. I spent the morning reviewing my grandmother's strategic files with new understanding. She hadn't just built a profitable company. She'd built an economic ecosystem that created value across multiple industries. The pharmaceutical division's research helped sick children while generating patents worth billions. The renewable energy investments were positioning Sterling Enterprises at the forefront of the global transition to clean technology. The affordable housing projects provided social benefits while producing steady returns. It was capitalism with conscience, proving that doing good and doing well weren't mutually exclusive. But it required patient capital and long-term thinking, exactly what quarterly-focused institutional investors couldn't provide. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Meet me at the Four Seasons Lounge, 2 p.m. Come alone. V. Victoria. After weeks of proxy warfare through lawyers and media surrogates, she wanted a direct confrontation. Every instinct told me it was a trap, but I also knew that face-to-face negotiations sometimes achieved what formal proceedings couldn't. The Four Seasons Lounge was neutral territory, public enough to prevent violence, but private enough for honest conversation. I arrived early and chose a corner table with clear sightlines, lessons learned from too many corporate thrillers. Victoria appeared precisely at 2 p.m., looking like she'd stepped from the pages of Fortune magazine. Prison hadn't diminished her presence or confidence. If anything, she seemed more focused and dangerous than before. Maya, she said, settling into the chair across from me. You look tired. Corporate warfare will do that to you. I assume you're here to gloat about David's betrayal? I'm here to offer you a way out. She signaled the waiter for champagne, acting like we were celebrating instead of negotiating a ceasefire. The institutional investors will win the proxy fight. You know it, I know it, they know it. The only question is how much damage gets done in the process. What are you proposing? Step down voluntarily. Accept a generous settlement, say $500 million, and walk away. You'll be wealthy beyond imagination, and Sterling Enterprises won't be destroyed in a proxy. Va, $500 million. 6 months ago, it would have been an incomprehensible sum. Now it felt like a bribe to abandon everything my grandmother had entrusted to me. And you get what out of this arrangement? Victoria smiled, the expression predatory rather than warm. I get vindication. The institutional investors need someone with family credibility to legitimize their takeover. Who better than the originally intended heir? So you'd become CEO? Eventually, David would serve as interim leadership while I handle the legal complications from my recent troubles. But yes, ultimately I'd take control of what should have been mine from the beginning. I studied my sister's face, seeing the calculating intelligence that had made her successful at Goldman Sachs. She'd turned her criminal charges into a business opportunity, positioning herself as the solution to the crisis she'd helped create. Victoria, do you understand what you'd be destroying? The pharmaceutical research that could help thousands of sick children? The clean energy projects that could address climate change? The affordable housing that provides homes for working families? I understand profit margins and shareholder returns, she replied dismissively. Everything else is just marketing. And there's the difference between us. I stood up, leaving my untouched drink on the table. You see Sterling Enterprises as a collection of assets to be optimized. I see it as a responsibility to be honored. Responsibility? Doesn't pay dividends, Maya. Sentiment doesn't generate returns. You can't run a Fortune 100 company on good intentions. Watch me. I walked away from the most generous offer I would ever receive, knowing that I was choosing the harder path. But my grandmother hadn't spent 60 years building Sterling Enterprises just to have it dismantled by people who measured success only in quarterly earnings reports. The next 3 weeks were a blur of investor meetings, media interviews, and strategic planning sessions. Every day brought new challenges as the proxy fight intensified. David proved to be a formidable opponent, using his insider knowledge of our operations to highlight vulnerabilities and question decisions. But something unexpected happened as I traveled the country meeting with institutional investors. The more I explained my grandmother's vision for responsible capitalism, the more support I found among younger fund managers and ESG-focused investors. They understood that sustainable long-term returns required more than just financial engineering. That breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Dr. Angela Foster at Meridian Pharmaceuticals. Her muscular dystrophy treatment had completed successful Phase 3 trials, showing remarkable results in helping children who'd previously had no therapeutic options. The FDA fast-tracked approval, and major medical centers began requesting access to the treatment. Maya, she called me the morning the approval was announced. You need to see the media coverage. This isn't just about one treatment. It's proving that your grandmother's research philosophy creates real value. The Wall Street Journal ran a front-page story titled, Sterling's Secret: How Patient Capital Produces Medical Breakthroughs. Financial analysts began questioning whether quarterly-focused management could have achieved the same innovation. Institutional investors started asking whether dismantling Sterling Enterprises might actually destroy value rather than create it. The proxy vote was held on a rain-soaked Tuesday in March, exactly 2 months after I'd first discovered my inheritance. The balloting was conducted electronically, with results announced in real time as votes were tabulated. I watched from Sterling Enterprises' boardroom, surrounded by the directors who'd supported me through the crisis. Margaret Whitfield provided running commentary as the numbers appeared on the screen. Wellington Management slate, 38%, 39, 41. My heart sank as their support climbed toward the majority needed for control. Sterling. Management slate 42%, 45, 48. The numbers seesawed back and forth as different investor blocks reported their votes. CalPERS went with the challengers, but several European pension funds supported my leadership. The Vanguard Group split their votes, supporting some incumbent directors while backing challengers for other positions. Final tally, Margaret announced as the last votes were recorded. Sterling management slate, 52.3%. The incumbent board is retained. I had won by less than 3 percentage points, the narrowest possible margin in corporate democracy. But I had won. The celebration was brief and subdued. Everyone understood that governing with such a narrow mandate would be challenging, and that future proxy challenges were inevitable if I didn't deliver extraordinary results. But as I stood in my office, that evening, looking out at Boston's skyline, I felt something I hadn't experienced since discovering my grandmother's secret: peace. I'd faced the worst corporate warfare could offer and emerged with my vision intact. 6 months later, Sterling Enterprises completed the largest IPO in history, raising $32 billion while maintaining control through a dual-class share structure. The offering was oversubscribed by 400%, with institutional investors clamoring for access to what Forbes called the most innovative public company of the decade. Victoria pleaded guilty to federal charges and received a suspended sentence in the exchange for cooperation with ongoing investigations. She moved to London, reportedly working as a consultant for financial firms that specialized in emerging markets. We haven't spoken since that day at the Four Seasons. David Park founded his own investment firm using contacts from the Proxy fight. His first fund focused on hostile takeovers of family-controlled companies. I heard through industry gossip that his returns were mediocre, proving that financial engineering couldn't replace strategic vision. As for me, I discovered that being a public company CEO was simultaneously easier and harder than fighting for control of the company. The media scrutiny was constant, but at least the attacks were professional rather than personal. The decisions were complex, but I had experienced teams to help navigate regulatory requirements and market dynamics. Most importantly, I had clarity about what Sterling Enterprises was supposed to accomplish. Every quarterly earnings call, every strategic planning session, every investment decision was guided by my grandmother's principle: build something that creates value for everyone it touches. Today, as I write this from the same office where my grandmother secretly managed her empire for decades, Sterling Enterprises employs 47,000 people across 6 continents. Our pharmaceutical division has treatments in development for 12 rare diseases. Our renewable energy projects generate enough clean electricity to power 3 million homes. Our affordable housing initiatives have provided quality homes for 15,000 families. The company is worth approximately $58 billion, making it one of the most valuable publicly traded corporations in the world. But the number I'm most proud of is 0. The number of employees we've laid off for purely financial reasons. Because I learned that the true measure of a company isn't its stock price or market capitalization, but its impact on the people whose lives it touches. My grandmother was right about responsibility, about building something that outlasts us all. She was also right about family. Some relationships can survive any challenge, while others crumble at the first test of character. I kept her paintings in my office, landscapes and portraits that now remind me daily that appearances can deceive, that the quietest person in the room might be the most powerful, and that sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money or property, but the wisdom to use both responsibly. The Sterling name is no longer a secret, but the values that built our success remain unchanged. Patience, integrity, and the revolutionary idea that business can be a force for good in the world. Not a bad legacy for a struggling artist who learned about corporate warfare the hard way. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.